this is what's going to happen in the end times. The book of Revelation tells us there's going to be 12,000 believers from the 12 tribes of Israel, and God is going to use these 144,000 evangelists during the end times, during the tribulation, to bring the good news to the nations. Why is that important? Because Israel in those days will ultimately fulfill their destiny to be a light to the nations, because in God's kingdom economy, you can ultimately miss out on the promise of the covenant blessings, but you can't lose the promise altogether. God has always had a divine plan for the Jewish people ever since the day that he made his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that is good news, because God always keeps his promises. Some people think that because of the majority of Jewish people did not receive Yeshua as the Messiah, that God did away with his promises and his covenant to the Jewish people. That is absolute silliness. As we said, if God didn't keep his promise to Israel, there's no way we can believe that he'd keep his promises to us. We see this in Romans 9, 10, and 11. Romans 9 is the glorious past that the Jewish people have had, the covenants, the promises, the temple, the scriptures, the Messiah. Romans 10 is their present rejection of Yeshua, the one who Moses and the prophets spoke of. But Romans 11 is their glorious future, that all Israel will be saved. And that's God's promise to the Jewish people. But before I touch on that, I want us to understand that God uses Israel whether they are believers or not believers. Think about it for a moment. God says, I will bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse you, Israel, and through you all the nations of the world will be blessed. And just think about in the natural how God has used Israel to bring blessing to the nations. Think about how many medical discoveries and scientific discoveries and entertainment and media and just so many businesses and academics. God, in so many ways, so many discoveries, so many Nobel Prizes. They are disproportionate to the number of Jews there are in the world, is the Jewish influence on the world. And that is because God has a covenant and blessing on the Jewish people that is still being released over the world today. But most important is the spiritual promise and the spiritual blessing that is going to come through the Jewish people. Because all the Jewish apostles, God used them. The gospel went to the world through the 12 Jewish apostles, and through Paul, the nations believed. The Hebrew of Hebrews, God used. But then, for the most part, the majority of believers have been Gentile. But this is what's going to happen in the end times. The book of Revelation tells us there's going to be 12,000 believers from the 12 tribes of Israel, and God is going to use these 144,000 evangelists during the end times, during the tribulation, to bring the good news to the nations. Why is that important? Because Israel in those days will ultimately fulfill their destiny to be a light to the nations, because in God's kingdom economy, you can ultimately miss out on the promise of the covenant blessings, but you can't lose the promise altogether. And that's why God is ultimately going to have these 144,000 evangelists to the nations. But then there's more, because right before the second coming of the Messiah, when all the nations come against Israel, when there seems to be no hope, the Jewish people are going to cry out to God, and they're going to see Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, coming in the clouds of heaven, and they're going to recognize that he is the one whom they have pierced, Zechariah 12, that they're going to mourn for him like one mourns for an only begotten son. They're going to receive him, and all Israel that are alive at the time of the coming of the Messiah will receive Yeshua and ultimately step into the kingdom promises and purposes that we read throughout Moses, the writings, and the prophets. That is a glorious day. Israel has a glorious past. God is still using them in the future. And there is a remnant like myself who has believed, but ultimately all Israel will be saved. all those who place their faith in him at the end of days, as Romans talked about. So this is the hope. This is the promise. Be encouraged. God is always faithful. And because he has been faithful to Israel, he will be faithful to Israel. He will be faithful to you as well.